Hello everyone, my name is Harley Gordon and welcome to the presentation. It's titled Why Extended Care Disrupts the Proper Execution of Retirement Portfolios. It's subtitled A Study in Advanced Consequence Management, not risk. I'll show you as we proceed. Advanced Consequence Management. The agenda, the consequences providing care over an extended period of years has on your client's family. Not your client, because as you'll see as we proceed, this is not a client issue. This is an issue that affects the client's family. Well, once you clearly understand what those consequences are, and there are two sets, we next move on to mitigating those consequences, and we do that through a plan. And then once that plan is in place, we'll take a look at long-term care insurance in ways that you never thought. In fact, this is titled, What Long-Term Care Insurance Actually Does May Surprise You, and then overcoming objections from the wealthy. Not just you as financial advisors, financial representatives, or insurance professionals dealing with high net worth individuals, but the wealthy themselves. Now, my goals in the period of time that we have are to give you compelling reasons why you must engage your clients in a discussion about extended care. Now, once we've done that, we move on to how to give you a basic skill set to discuss those consequences in the ordinary course of reviewing an existing plan. And then we're going to try and help you expand your market, if you're interested, by moving from those who have a prior experience or who are unhealthy, and the carriers are not going to write those individuals if long-term care insurance is appropriate, to those with no prior experience and the wealthy. So we start with this thought. Failure to have a discussion about extended care with middle-aged clients not could but will have severe consequences to their families. Now, there are two sets of distinct consequences. We start by a review of the subject matter. Now, the need for care is caused by something referred to as impairments. There are two. The first is a physical impairment, which is a chronic medical condition. Now, that's defined as an illness that can be managed with medication and therapy, but can never be cured by either. Perfect examples: Parkinson's, MS, stroke, diabetes. A person can live with these illnesses. They can be managed. They cannot be cured. But the problem is, as these illnesses progress, and many of them do, they severely compromise the individual's ability to get through the most basic of daily routines. Those are called ADLs, activities of daily living. Now, the second type of impairment, I think, is the worst. It's cognitive in nature, which is a marked or measured decline in one's intellect to the extent that they are no longer safe. He or she, too, is severely compromised. Now, this type of care is called custodial. It's simply assistance with ADLs because you have a physical impairment, or it is supervision because you have a cognitive impairment. Now, by definition, if you have these kinds of illnesses, your care quickly becomes all-consuming. It's pretty basic. If you can't get through your basic ADLs, or if you're not oriented as to time and place, your care is all-consuming, which means those that the client loves have no choice but to put their lives aside to provide what amounts to 24-hour supervision. And that now creates the first of two sets of unintended serious consequences. We start with what happens to the emotional and physical well-being of those your client loves. Their health is severely compromised. I'm going to put it to you in some very easy to understand phrases. We call them power phrases that you can use with your clients. And the first one is, providing care to chronically ill individuals will make healthy caregivers chronically ill. And ladies and gentlemen, that's a fact. Here's a fact. The sun comes up in the east in the morning. Here's a fact. If you or a client has a chronic illness, those trying to provide the care will become chronically ill as well. Now, if it is a traditional family or if there's a child involved, it will almost always compel one of the children to put aside his or her life. They won't have a choice for two reasons. Either they see the caregiving parent, let's say it's the mother providing care for their dad, that person sees her mother start to buckle, and that's a good word here, buckle from the responsibility of this 24/7. That's no longer acceptable, so a child has to step in, or there may not be a parent to provide care because that parent died. There's only a surviving parent. Now, that has its own set of consequences for the child. It has an impact on her life, relationship with her spouse if she's married, or children, and it has an impact on something you may not have thought about. It has a direct impact on her or her relationship with siblings who don't help out. It strains them. So here's the other little fact. Providing care does not bring families together. It almost always tears families apart. To put this in language that perhaps it's easy to understand and you can explain or share with your clients, particularly those with no prior experience. Put simply, if your client ever needs care over a period of years, his life is not going to end. That's correct. Someone else's life is going to end as they know it. Now, it's one thing to give you the basics of the subject and the consequences. It's another thing to give you some help in how to explain it to your client. So I'm going to take a moment to give you a suggestion about how it should be explained. Now, many people think that extended care is a condition, like Parkinson's, MS, or a stroke. Many people also think it's a place like a nursing home or assisted living. It isn't. Extended care is a life-changing event that has devastating consequences to those who have no choice but to put their lives aside to provide that care. It has devastating consequences also financially, which we'll pick up a bit later on. You know, when you come to think about it, that's actually what an unexpected death is during working years. See, it's not a car crash, it's not a plane crash, it's not a heart attack or cancer, because frankly, no one thinks that's going to happen to them. An unexpected death during working years is a life-changing event. When you think about it, that's what an unanticipated, unexpected disability is. See, these are life-changing events, and that's how you have to explain it to people. Because when you start talking about extended care, your client's going to say, what? It's not going to happen to me. So it's better to show that it's an event that has an impact on others. Now, the second consequence, and this deals directly with your business model, is no less severe. If that business model is based on creating plans to generate income during retirement, if that business plan, that model, is to secure the financial viability of a surviving spouse, then paying for care will, not could, will disrupt every aspect of your business model. Because paying for care requires a reallocation of income. And this has a direct impact on your client's ability to keep his or her financial commitments. Now, we're going under the assumption that when dealing with successful people, there's no such thing as a discretionary expense, which means that their income is pretty much committed to those expenses. But if you have to pay for care, it causes this reallocation, so it calls into question, would you be able to keep those commitments? And by the way, if the illness lasts long enough, it almost always causes an unintended invasion of the investment portfolio, and that has its own set of consequences. Putting it another way, paying for care disrupts a tax plan. Stop for a second. If the plan is to minimize taxes by taking qualified funds over a period of years, dipping into that portfolio for excess income, see, creates unnecessary taxes. There's the question of when you take the money to pay for care. If you had to pay for care in 2009, 2010, you would have actualized a loss. That's on top of the unnecessary taxes. Liquidity is a serious issue for wealthier clients. Can you get the money to actually pay for care? If you're in a real estate investment trust, or if you're in a hedge fund, you don't get out when you want to get out. You get out when they want you out. If you have clients who have a special needs plan because they have a special needs child, it disrupts that plan. And of course, it disrupts the overall plan to keep financial commitments. Now, once you understand those two sets of consequences and the limited time that we have, the next question is, well, how do you deal with it? And you deal with it, you mitigate those consequences, not by talking about an insurance product, but by creating a plan. Now, here's the plan. It's to allow your client to remain safe in the community, and that's defined as at home, supported by home care, adult daycare, or perhaps assisted living. The plan doesn't call for nursing home care. And if you do this right, that client will spend very little, if any, time in a nursing home. So the plan is to keep this individual safe in the community while mitigating the two sets of consequences. Again, it's to mitigate the two sets of consequences, which are the emotional and physical well-being of a client that's put into play, and of course the financial viability. So that's the goal of the plan. Put another way, the plan's goal is to place the family back to where they were emotionally, physically, and financially as best as possible prior to an unexpected unexpected death. Well, that's a life insurance thought, isn't it? An unexpected disability, an unexpected medical event. See, when you talk about insurance products, their goal is not to prevent the individual from dying, becoming disabled, or needing a medical care. The goal of those products is not to what? Can't make them better. The goal of that plan is to try and put the family back to where they were as best as possible prior to the intervening unexpected event. It's the same thought process when it comes to this subject. Now, here are some ideas on how to address the subject with your clients. We want to give you a skill set to do so. It's one thing to understand the consequences. It's another thing to express it to a client in a way that you have confidence to do so, you can control the interview, and it gives clients compelling reasons to take action. So let's take a look at what you're doing right now versus what we refer to as consultative-based discussions. So here's what you might be doing right now. If you do it proactively, you basically sit the client down and discuss the risk of needing care as one ages. They're pretty much selling scripts for this. So you talk about we're in an aging society, people are living longer, and of course the next logical step would be to explain that as we live longer, we're far more likely to get illnesses that will incapacitate us. Say a physical impairment, say stroke, Parkinson, or perhaps a cognitive disability. And once you lay out that that is likely, that's in his or her future, you then set out a set of consequences to the individual. So you tell the individual that if he had dementia, he wouldn't be able to maintain his independence. He wouldn't be able to protect his assets, paying for care. He wouldn't be able to choose where his care is given, and all that kind of stuff. So you tell him that something is likely to happen to him, and when it does happen to him, here are the consequences to him. And then what do? You position, in this case, long-term care insurance as a product that solves these issues. If you have long-term care insurance, what? That's correct. Maintain your independence. You stay at home. Protect your assets. See? The problem is that what we call risk-based selling, and that is risk-based selling, is based on a fatally flawed presumption. And the presumption is that the person you're talking to, your client, is actually interested in listening to what you have to say. And that's a pretty big presumption. Because frankly, what? He has absolutely no interest in listening to a recitation of all the awful things that are in his future, because in his mind, he believes that's correct. They will never happen. The presumption that the individual is interested in a product to protect him or herself from those illnesses is just that, another presumption. What do I need a product to protect me from events that will never happen? Now, for those of you who have tried to have this discussion, you might be saying at this point, I'm confused. This appears to work. I lay out what the risk and cost of care is and won't be able to maintain you, and people buy. Well, I ask you for a second to think, who's typically buying this product from you? Are you selling anything, or are they buying it? It tends to fall into three categories. First are those with a prior experience. Now, why are they buying? Nothing to do with you. No disrespect. But they saw firsthand the two sets of consequences. Then there are those who self-nominate themselves because they have health issues. And in the past, if you were thinking about selling long-term care insurance, they would write them. Those days are gone. And to a much lesser degree, there are those who absolutely believe the event will never happen, no prior experience, but they tend to listen to who? Their spouse. So what happens when you use a risk-based theory with those who have no prior experience? How many of you have you heard the objection, I won't live a long life? Well, it happens all the time. So you know what they're saying? I won't live long enough to get these illnesses that you say are in my future, and therefore, what do we have in this discussion about product? even if I do need care. I'm sorry, even if I do live a long life, I'll never need care. So once again, why are we having this discussion about buying a product I don't need? Well, I'll never go to a nursing home. Then you get in an argument. But what if you do? But I won't. But wouldn't you admit? No. But you see the statistics? I understand. So is that? No. See, it goes back and forth. And when they really get tired of listening to this, they'll tell you, you know something? I got enough money to cover the cost. You know what they just told you? The event will never happen. For those of you who are not that familiar with insurance, a person will always spend whatever is necessary out of his, usually his or her, mostly his pocket, to cover an event he deeply doesn't believe. An example is DI, disability income. Don't need it, everything is great, look at me, not going to happen. You sure? What if it did? I'll take it out of my own pocket, not an issue. The next time you see this person is when what? Slight stroke, see? So the problem with this is that you've created a mismatch of interest. Now, if your interest is solely in educating the client about the risk and cost of needing care, it doesn't work because he has no interest at all in listening to it, and therefore you're mismatch. See the complete disconnect. In fact, it creates something that I refer to as a selling environment. The client believes that the only reason you're sharing this information, this education about risk and cost of care, is what? That's correct. You already figured it out. It's not to help the client, because you never asked what was important to the client. It's simply to sell a product. Now, for those people in the audience, I'm not sure there are that many, who do this on a full-time basis, I mean, you're probably used to the rejection. But for those of you who sell it occasionally and want to try and sell it, you can't sell it the way you're doing it. It just doesn't work. You're just not going to do it. Here's what does work and what's been very successful and want to share with you today. First, what you're going to see is consistent with your culture of service and planning. It is not product-oriented. Now, we refer to this as consultative engagement. Consultative engagement is based on educating a client about how severe the consequences to those the client loves would be if, not when, an unexpected event happened in his or her life. It's all based on educating clients about a set of consequences. To refresh your memory, we talked about them a few minutes ago: emotional and physical, and of course financial. Now, this principle is predicated on what I believe, deeply believe, is the following precept: that someone who loves someone other than themselves, people who love someone other than themselves will take steps to protect those people. Here's the key: you got to give them compelling reasons to do so. And those compelling reasons I've suggested to you are the awful consequences of providing care, the awful consequences financially. So the focus of the discussion should not be on educating a client about the cost of care, the risk of care, maintaining your independence, product-oriented. It should be on focusing the discussion on educating the client about the severe consequences. An unexpected death, I'm sorry, that's a discussion with regard to what? Life insurance. An unexpected that's disability. Or in this case, an unexpected need for care. You see, it's the same discussion. This should help you not just with long-term care insurance, if you're considering it, but it should enhance how you sell life and DI. It's simply based on educating clients about something that, if left unattended to and ever happened, would devastate those he loves. See that? That's powerful. Now, once the client understands how severe the consequences are, he or she will say, I don't want that to happen. And that's when you start talking about a plan. And the client will let you put together a plan, even though what? He deeply believes the event will never happen. I'll give you an example. We start every conversation, suggest you do the same with, tell me what's important to you. What's important to you? What responsibilities do you now have you didn't think you'd have 10 or 15 years ago? Do you see taking most, if not all, of your financial responsibilities into retirement in one form or another? Amen. Right there. Successful people never, ever give up expenses They assume more as lifestyle, as commitments increase. So here's a great question. I'll give you an example that you want to ask me if you were my financial advisor. Harley, I haven't asked you this. I should have, but tell me, what's important to you? What responsibilities do you now have you didn't think you'd have 10 or 15 years ago? I would say to you, my former spouse. That might be puzzling to you, but not everyone hates their former spouse. And one of the things that you would educate me, and what we're trying to pass on to you that can be helpful to you, is to ask me two questions. Is she remarried? Now, by the way, you would have known this because you're my FA for years. But, of course, the answer is no. And are there children? You know the answer. Now, you already probably knew that, but watch this. You would then proceed to educate me about what would happen to our children if my former spouse ever needed care. If I said my children, that's incorrect. Our children, should my former spouse ever need care. Now, I'm going to listen to you because I know you have my best interest at heart. And you're going to tell me that it would devastate them emotionally and physically. You would educate me that if she needed care, income that she has, which I still help her with, would have to be reallocated. She may not be able to help the kids or the grandchildren or keep the house up, which becomes the center of family activities. You see the consequences you've laid out? And I would probably say what? That's unacceptable. Have we talked about product here? You're educating me about something that's important to me, and it starts not with a presumption that I'm interested in listening to risk and awful things happening. The presumption is I will respond if you tell me something that's of interest to me. Now, consultative engagement creates something called a mutuality of interest. By asking clients who or what is important to them, you have the opportunity to explain what would happen to those they love if it ever did. Now, those who love someone other than themselves, remember, going back, we're reviewing this, will take action to protect those individuals if given good reason to do so. And you just gave me a good reason to do so. We now have something called a mutuality of interest. So here's what you've just done. Your client who began the discussion, now these are people with no prior experience, because if you're selling the product, we already talked about this, prior experience doesn't require selling. You have to be at the right place at the right time. They're motivated. See, they're self-nominators. So that they nominate themselves for the product because they've had the experience or they're unhealthy. But in talking to a client with no prior experience, watch this. The individual began the discussion with the absolute unshakable belief that the risk of needing care over a period of years was what? Exactly right, was exactly zero. But based on educating him or her about what would happen to those people that are important to him, he now concludes that the 0% risk of needing care is incredibly too high. Wow. Think about life insurance for a second. I have lots of life insurance. I've never had a health issue in my whole life. I just got issued a large policy. And I had a Premier, Millennium, Deluxe, Platinum, whatever they call it, the highest rating, which means that my unexpected death was less than 1%. Did I believe I was going to die? No, zero. Why would I buy the policy? Because the 0% risk it's correct, it's too high. I measured the impact, the consequences. Awesome way to look at life insurance, terrific way to look at this subject. Now, once the plan has been created, and the plan, frankly, is quite straightforward, to keep you home, keep you safe, while mitigating the two sets of consequences. So the first set, emotionally and physically, would be mitigated by having someone else provide the care and have them supervise it. Financially, it would be mitigated if you had someone else pay for the care. That's the plan. So the plan's in place. The next question is, what do you think will fund it? And now let's take a few minutes to think differently about long-term care insurance. Did I mention I'm not licensed? I don't think I did. I think it's important to put it in here. I'm not licensed to sell any insurance product at all. In fact, I usually start these presentations by saying I don't care whether you like the product or not. It's not why I'm here. I already know what many of you think. It's okay. No, it's important. But you kind of self-select who you recommend it to. We're going to show you how to take a look at this in a way that you would be more willing to proactively discuss it. So I don't sell the product. I think when I'm finished, you look at it a bit differently and maybe, again, as I mentioned, be more proactive in discussing it. So the traditional approach in viewing this product is that of protected assets. It's an asset protection tool. Yeah, everyone's shaking their head. Yeah, that's about right. But the problem is when you're dealing with the wealthy and you have to start going after people who can afford the premiums. You've seen the premiums. So you have to go after those who have very, very good income. For all intents and purposes, in most parts of this country, you can't even talk to a client about long-term care insurance if the couple's income is less than $50,000. You can't do it anymore. Look at the premiums. You have to go after those with 70, 80, 90, 125, 150,000. Oh, there aren't many? Really? There's plenty of wealth in this country. So the problem is when you look at this as an asset protection tool, here comes the debilitating objection. If not from you, then from the client, and that, of course, is I have enough assets to self-insure the event. It's hard to overcome that objection. The better way to look at it is to think about what business you're in, not what business they're in. And it starts with considering that assets don't really pay for care. Income pays for care. Assets don't pay for much if you got the right plan. They should be looked at almost exclusively as capital in nature. Now, only talking about my world, there are two forms of capital in this discussion. There's current capital and future capital assets. A current capital asset would be the building we're in. If it ceases to generate cash flow, it's a parking lot. People put money into the COTC program. That's a capital investment. Have you thought about every dollar you put into a retirement portfolio as being capital in nature? That's right. It's capital in nature. The intent of those assets is not to be used to support lifestyle in retirement, but to be used to generate predictable streams of income. So it's far better to look at income paying for care, not assets. In fact, forget what I think. What are your clients most concerned about going into retirement? Having enough income. What are you doing when you start this great migration from asset income, from asset accumulation to income distribution? See what you're doing here? We live in a world of cash flow. I'm going to give you an example for a second. A client has $500,000 in capital. Say, I look at it as capital. If you're lucky, it generates $50,000 or $25,000. $1.5 million, $75,000, $2 million, $100,000. Now that's assuming no taxes, okay? That's assuming a 5% return, and that's assuming that the whole portfolio is in the pool, meaning it's all being used to generate income. I'll give you all that. Now, what is your client going into retirement concerned about? The $2 million or the $100,000? It's the $100,000. See what you just done? You took $2 million, and perhaps you yourself thought it was sufficient to cover the cost of care, and thought about it in its proper terms as simply a generator of income. Now, if you have $100,000 in a $2 million portfolio, add another $40,000 from Social Security or whatever it might be, $140,000. Now, going into retirement, dollars have specific purposes. And those purposes would be, and are, and will be, to support lifestyle. How much of that income has been allocated to pay for care? Well, you know the answer. None of it. See, none of it. So the question arises, should your client need care, which in his mind he will not, where would the cash flow come from to both pay for care and what? Keep financial commitments as well. Interesting, huh? Anyone here comfortable selling DI? Few people are. What's the purpose of disability income? It's to guarantee income. See, disability income insurance, guarantee. It doesn't guarantee assets because people aren't living on assets. They're living on income. So the question once again is, should your client need care, and what did I tell you? This is not a risk proposition. Where's the cash flow going to come from? Option 2, transferring the responsibility to an insurance carrier. Now, we spend a considerable period of time. Watch how much time we spend on the product. Not much, because it's really not a product. It's a thoughtful sale based on consequences and planning. So now that you see that using your assets to pay for care, if you're wealthy, doesn't really fit the bill, you can use your income, but then again, you can't keep your financial commitments. We now move to what long-term care insurance actually does. May surprise you. So the traditional view of this product is that it allows the client to maintain independence, receive quality care where the individual wants it, usually at the house or maybe assisted living, clearly not a nursing home, but if the client needed a nursing home, you could afford the nursing home with the long-term care insurance product and protect assets as well. So that's everyone's shaking. That's the traditional view. Doesn't do that. See, the problem is your client deeply believes that care will never, what? That's correct. See, you're all shaking your head. Care will never be needed. Forget your client. Take a look at me. If I believe I'll never have a stroke, Parkinson's, or MS, and trust me, it's not going to happen to me, then what do I care about maintaining my independence? What do I care about receiving quality care? What do I care about getting into a good nursing home? What do I care about protecting my assets from an event that's never going to happen? See? And there's your pushback again. What if I don't need care? I won't live a long life. Because you're trying to sell risk to an individual for the specific purpose of selling a product to what? To deal with that risk. It doesn't work. So now, in the couple of minutes that I have, I want to talk about the essence of the product, the value proposition that no dollar figure can be put on. That is critical. I told you that I own life insurance. It's a lot of money. I could certainly put that money aside. I could certainly use it for other things, buy a nicer car, maybe another house. But I chose to take what is beaucoup, a lot of that income, and put it into insurance. I did it because there was a value proposition to it. And the value proposition is this. It protects those I invited into my life and took responsibility for. It's those people I love. Now, here's how it does it. Let's follow this step by step. The policy provides a stream of income in the form of a daily benefit. Now, that's used not to pay for your care, because if you put it like that, he'll come back and say, what? I don't need care. What is it used for? It's used to put the plan, to fund the plan. Remember, he said, I don't want my family to go through this. Here's the plan to mitigate the consequences. I need a funding source for that plan. Now, if I have a source of income to fund the plan, that money can be used to hire professionals to provide it. And so if someone else is providing it, here we go. That's better. Here we go. Those you love end up supervising it. Ask anyone who's had a prior experience, would it have been better if other people provided the care and you could have, they'll tell you in a heartbeat, absolutely. Now, if there are children, you've given the kids a second gift of life. That's one of the most important thoughts I want to leave you with. The first gift was bringing them into this life. The second gift is to say, what? This is not your responsibility. That's the selfless act of being a parent. That's the selfless act of saying if a child is sick, you say to whoever you pray to, take me, leave that child alone. You think about what I just said. You want to see why people buy it with prior experience? Because they want to make sure that what they went through as children, their children don't go through. What you've done now by having a stream of income to pay for that care mitigates the first set of consequences. Those individuals end up continuing to have their life. Now, since care is paid for by a stream of income, it means that you don't have to what? Reallocate your primary stream of income to pay for care. This means that you're able to keep all of the financial commitments, none of which are discretionary. I don't have to reallocate income. Now watch, if I never have to touch the income, why would I have to go into the portfolio or the corpus? I don't, which means that the plan to minimize taxes, wait out a down market, make sure I don't have to liquidate because I have liquidity issues, make sure that portfolio is there to generate income, that executes absolutely perfectly. So a view from 30,000 feet. Creating and funding a plan for extended care will preserve every other plan you created as a financial advisor for your clients. It allows a tax plan to execute properly. It allows your client's plan that you put together with him or her or them to keep financial commitments because it will now execute properly. And your client's succession plan will execute properly as well. Think about these things as you go back to your office and start just kind of baby steps. Sit down with a client and ask this: what's important to you? What responsibilities do you now have you didn't think you'd have 15 or 20 years ago? Tom, do you see taking most of those responsibilities into retirement? Now, if the client has told you what's important, told you what the responsibilities are, remind them, and then engage with a conversation that starts with the following. Tom, I need to talk to you about what would happen to Ellen and the children emotionally and physically if you lived a long life and ever needed care, which you may never do. I also need to talk to you about what would happen to your ability to keep your financial commitments to those you love if care was ever needed. That's a wonderful way to start a conversation and then go from there. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully the information has been helpful to you.